This morning on News Talk, you will have heard Dana Ehrlich, the Israeli ambassador to Ireland. She was speaking to Pat Kenny, and she was talking about the fact that they are closing their embassy. Israel are closing their embassy in this country. And she said Ireland had become a bit of an outlier in Europe with its attitude to Israel.
Even within the EU, Ireland is considered extreme with its obsession, for lack of another word, against Israel. For a year, Ireland is saying that Israel is isolated. But what we have seen is that we continue to collaborate with allies, with countries in the region, with other countries internationally who understand the threat that we are under. What we've seen is that Ireland is isolating itself.
That was Dana Ehrlich on the Pat Kenny show this morning. You can listen back to everything she had to say if you missed it. It's available as a podcast. But Joe Brolly is the host of the Free State podcast and a Sunday Independent columnist as well. I spoke to Joe shortly before coming on air about all of this, and I put it to him, this idea expressed by Dana Ehrlich that Ireland is becoming an outlier in Europe and becoming ever more anti-Israel.
Tolerance of genocide is an unusual concept that I'm not familiar with. That we ought to simply disregard the evidence of our eyes and ears, and disregard the annihilation of a people and annihilation of all their hospitals or universities, all the things that we've seen, and all the vile propaganda that goes with that. And if we don't disregard that, if we don't say, look, that's fine, if we're not like America and we give Benjamin Netanyahu 58 standing ovations when he goes to Congress, then we're anti-Semitic, And I think it's symptomatic of a state, the Israeli state, that's become completely dehumanized, Very much, I suppose. I mean, if you look at some of the outworkings of that, Major Mosh Grunberg, on his daughter Ella's second birthday, he's a commander in the IDF. He made a very special birthday video for her. I don't know if you saw that. He blew up a Palestinian school. There was great rejoicing and joy. And, smashing the certificates in the school, throwing a hand grenade into a sacred mosque in the West Bank just as morning prayer begins, And I don't know if you saw in November, Israel's public broadcaster Khan, it broadcast footage of Israeli school children singing a song celebrating Israel's annihilation of the Palestinians. One of the lines was, "Within a year we will eliminate them all." And they got a rousing cheer when they had finished. It was like going to see your kids at the nativity play and clapping them. And so in that sort of perverse society, the only way to justify that to yourself is to have this sort of these layers of propaganda around you, and reminded me of what the famous German propagandist Joseph Goebbels said. The essential thing is to accuse your opponent of that which you are accused.
And the example of that is what? Like it's things like where they say, that from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That when they accuse people who chant that or sing that at a rally as being kind of genocidally anti-Semitic and calling for kind of the destruction, that's what they're doing. They're kind of channeling Goebbels.
I call it sort of anti-Semitism. I have Jewish friends. I'm very conscious of the fact that they are very uncomfortable, as you might expect, in light of the annihilation that we're seeing. Just yesterday, 20 civilians were murdered in a UN school where they were sheltering, without food or water. They're living on soup kitchens where animal feed is used in the soup. And they were burned alive yesterday. And I don't know if you saw those shocking images. And of course, Jewish people, because of their attachment to Israel, are going to be very uncomfortable. But it is part of the propaganda playbook. It was Golda Meir, who's sort of one of the most famous of all Israeli politicians, who was the fourth prime minister of Israel. She said, and Golda was very, very similar to a lot of the people who are in Israel now. She was born in Kyiv, emigrated to America with her family. And in 1921, she moved with her family to what was then called Mandatory Palestine. It was a sort of a protectorate. The British Empire owned it. She lived in Tel Aviv. And she said, whenever she eventually became the prime minister, and she knew what the genesis of the state was. There is no such thing as Palestinians. And we cannot forgive the Arabs for forcing us to kill their children. And she was the one who said famously, look, the most important weapon we have is that anyone who criticizes, we must accuse them of anti-Semitism. Because that is an allegation that can never be unstuck once you make that allegation and continue to make that. And really, the entire civilized world now are anti-Semites. Anyone who says, well, look, this is mental. These people are completely out of control. Of course, it's supported by the US. They're currently illegally invading Syria. Can you imagine if the Russians were doing this to Britain? An equally identical, equally unlawful situation. Just a few weeks ago, they were indiscriminately bombing Lebanon. And these things are so grotesque, so beyond our experience, that it seems in our country inconceivable that we would endorse them and support them and say, well, yes, we understand that, and you cannot appease these people, as we have tried to do. You can't appease Dana Ehrlich or the Israelis, you cannot tolerate genocide. Dana was invited to the Fianna Fáil Ardèche, She accompanied Micheál Martin on a propaganda tour of Israel. That was the one where Micheál embarrassed himself, really humiliated himself, wearing an IDF uniform, pointing at a small hole in the ceiling in a house in Israel, while this sort of campaign of genocide was underway.
Well, he was wearing an IDF armoured vest or a protective vest because I guess the IDF were with him. He hardly had a spare vest without IDF insignia.
He humiliated himself and he humiliated us by doing that. And yet, she's been a frequent guest on RT and Virgin on News Talk. She writes opinion pieces in the newspapers, most recently yesterday. And it's a full-on attack on us, using the propaganda playbook. She attacked our president, She has accused Ireland of gross anti-Semitism, And the Irish government, she said yesterday, is guilty of the worst current incarnation of anti-Semitism. And our anti-Israel obsession, get this one, does not help peace or coexistence. And you must hijack language and pervert it when you're doing what the Israelis are doing. And the fact that they've left, it's they who have abandoned the embassy. I think it's a source of shame for Ireland that that the motion in the Dáil to expel her was defeated. The government said, we must maintain dialogue. What dialogue is it, do you think, that we should maintain? Let's look at what has happened recently there. And I wanted to make this point, Kieran. Haaretz, as you know, is the oldest Israeli newspaper, and it's their newspaper of record. It's the equivalent of the Irish Times, widely respected around the world. Gideon Levi is their sort of iconic editor. And last month they were sanctioned by the Israeli government, and it was a unanimous decision of the cabinet for the crime of publishing anti-Semitic propaganda that hurts the Israeli state. That's the Israeli newspaper of record, where I subscribe to that because you get a true sort of unvarnished account of what's going on, and that's simply another step in the genocidal journey, because destruction of the press is essential and destruction of any criticism is essential. Just 2 months ago, they invaded Al Jazeera's offices in the West Bank, which isn't even part of Israel. and they evicted the staff and confiscated the equipment. They've murdered 164 journalists in Gaza, including 3 in the past 24 hours. You know, can you imagine? Can you imagine? I mean, I suppose we're fortunate that they haven't attacked the journalists here. You know, that they haven't sort of launched a campaign of murder against us. And let me ask you this question in principle.
Yeah.
Why not? They ignore all norms of international law. They laugh at the International Court of Criminal Justice. You know, they laugh at the International Criminal Court. They've completely ignored their rulings. So what is it that we've done wrong exactly, other than ask them to comply with the law? Like, would you get a serial killer into the program and listen to the serial killer saying, you know, well, I can't understand. I can't understand what the law courts in Ireland are talking about. It's entirely legitimate what I'm doing. I just like killing women.
Well, look, far be it from me to appoint myself. I know, but what they might say is, well, what we've done is it's for political reasons or for anti-Israeli reasons, as they'd put it, or anti-Semitic reasons. We've asked the court to kind of redefine genocide in such a way that would strengthen the case against Israel.
I mean, you can twist words whatever way you want to, but what you can't do is deny what we're seeing. You know, every university has been destroyed. Every holy place has been destroyed. Every residential home has been destroyed. These people are being picked off. Children are being picked off by snipers. They have the largest number of child amputees in the world. I mean, we heard 60 American doctors and surgeons who had returned from Gaza. You know, we saw their open letter talking about snipers deliberately targeting children and never having seen so many kids with sniper shots, you know, murdered by sniper shots. You know, they're now denied anesthetics. One of the items that is not allowed in there any longer is anesthetics. Like, you should not be interviewing these people. We should not be giving any succor to these people, because what they're doing is demonic beyond anything I've ever witnessed. You know, and all of this comfort and sanctuary that we've given them and all of the protections that we've given them. I mean, how do you have any diplomacy? How do you have any relationships with this sort of entirely grotesque, inhumane regime? I mean, you tell me.
Yeah, look, I guess the argument in favour of that is that
there's an
international diplomatic relations work on the basis of, I was going to say turning a blind eye. That's the wrong way to describe it, but maybe it's a kind of an accurate way to describe it. To the realities of how certain states operate. Like, we have diplomatic relations with the North Koreans, for example. You know, and
the North Koreans aren't invading the countries around them.
No, but there's been times they've effectively starved their own people, kind of for political ends.
Well, hold on a second. United States have put a most punitive sanctions regime on them because they won't comply. They won't open up the McDonald's and they won't allow.
No, but okay. I'll give you other examples. I'll give you examples that have nothing to do with the United States. We have diplomatic relations. We have diplomatic relations with countries where they behead people for being gay.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't think the fact that we have diplomatic relations is any way excusing that.
Okay, those are. I take that point, but not genocidal regimes who are actively. I mean, now signs have sprung all over the West Bank, put there by the Israeli government, saying there is no future in Palestine, as in get out. You know, I mean, 2 weeks ago, you know, I thought it was a particularly grotesque example in all the grotesquerie that we've had to witness. You know, a drone sought out and murdered the man who runs the Gazan soup kitchen in North Gaza. He had been feeding 3,000 people a day, Mahmoud al-Madoun. And on his way to what was left of Kamal Adwan Hospital, okay, in the ruins of that, he feeds the patients every Saturday with a very basic vegetable stew, and often it's augmented with animal feed. And on his way to the hospital 2 Saturdays ago, he was sought out by a drone. And witnesses described it, the drone centered in on him, and killed him with gunfire at close range. His mistake? He became prominent. He wrote an opinion piece in the Washington Post in April of this year. He went viral in September when a video appeared of him feeding a starving crowd in northern Gaza, murdered by them and his 7 children. Do you know how many food aid workers have been murdered since then in the last fortnight? This is food aid workers. Think of our Capuchin monks. Think of our volunteers in Grafton Street. Think of, it's 17 food aid workers have been murdered since then. And the idea that Dana Ehrlich is appearing on our airwaves and writing opinion pieces, etc., is perverse. Because we must draw a line with genocide. And the only reason that Israel is still able to propagate this nonsense, this outrageous stuff all around the planet, is because they're endorsed by the US and the Western colonial powers. And it's as simple as that.
But that gets us as well to the objection that some people here have raised about the Irish approach. It's not so much that they deny the reality of what you've been talking about, or kind of UN Special Committee findings, or UN Commission of Inquiry findings, or Amnesty International findings, or all of that. Instead, it's a kind of a self-interested view of the world. It's, we shouldn't do this because this actually might be bad for Ireland. There could be blowback from the United States.
Well, I mean, that's the advantage that we have of our neutrality and things like that, that we're still able to make points like that. I mean, the Brits are stuck, the French are stuck. They're all stuck now. They're all roped into this bizarro world, as I call it, fantasemitism. I mean, and like I noticed, and this is a constant thing, how terribly difficult it is for Jewish people now. There's terrible anti-Semitism in Ireland. It's absolutely terrible. It's rampant. Charlie Bentley Astor, have you ever heard of her?
No. She
writes for the Telegraph, and she tweeted this. I was walking through London last night when someone called out of the dark at me, "Are you Jew?" I froze and turned around. It was 2 schoolgirls. They again asked if I was a Jew. They had something in their hands. I panicked. I said no. I was expecting them to launch into an angry Palestine rant and thrust pamphlet material at me. It turns out they were handing out candles for Hanukkah. I'm not Jewish, but I will never forget that volt of panic I felt in the moment I realized I was being viewed as a Jew, and not knowing if things would end very badly because of it. I cannot imagine what actual Jews in London and Europe are going through at the moment. Whilst their offer of candles set my mind at rest and the world became a better place for a moment, it's easy to imagine such an interaction going in the opposite direction. Like as in turning off your power and water, Charlie, bombing your local hospital and school, bulldozing your house, shooting your children, seeking out, food aid workers, doctors, surgeons, murdering them indiscriminately. And this is the
Are you not conflating Jewishness there now with the Israeli state?
No, I'm not at all. I'm not at all. I mean, the point is this, that, I saw the chairperson of the Jewish Representative Council of Ireland saying he was deeply concerned by the deterioration in relations between Ireland and Israel. And I can understand that. I mean, he's the chairman of the Jewish Representative Council. And he said that the Irish government's intervention in the International Court of Justice case, and I mean, I read these things. That's who I am. I read every page. I read the submissions that are made with great interest, and it's a very cogent case for the International Court of Justice. It's evidence-based. The Israeli response to that, their response was, this is anti-Semitic. That's it. That was their response. But anyway, Morris said that the Irish government's intervention in the International Court of Justice case, which accuses Israel of genocide, and which the court has said already there is a plausible case of genocide, therefore we'll hear the whole case, and they laid down a series of orders for Israel, all of which were ignored. He said it risks, quote, oversimplifying a highly complex and tragic conflict. What? Unfairly isolating in Israel and undermining the integrity of the term genocide, right? And so he's deeply concerned about that, but he's not deeply concerned about the demonic annihilation of an entire people, hospitals, universities, shops, schools, churches, mosques. mean, is he concerned about Israel systematically starving the people of Gaza? Destroying every home?
Well, he's not here to defend himself. He might say he's absolutely concerned about them, but he was raising a point about the Irish submission.
In the same way that Joe Biden's very concerned about the humanitarian situation on the ground in Gaza.
The Hard Shoulder with Kieran Cuddihy.
With the MG hybrid and electric range.
Weekdays from 4